The rain hit the roof hard. Cold wind howled through the cracks of the old mining cabin. John sat near the fire, sipping hot tea. Trying to ignore the silence around him, he lived alone on this frozen planet, far from Earth, far from people. He liked it that way, or at least, that's what he told himself. Then came the knock, soft, slow, almost like someone was afraid to be heard. He stood up quickly, confused. No one ever came this far, especially not at night. He opened the heavy metal door, and his breath caught in his throat. There, in the freezing rain, stood a woman. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Her body was shaking, and in her arms she held a tiny girl wrapped in cloth. Both were wet, cold, and barely standing. The woman fell to her knees, her voice trembling. "Just feed my daughter." "Human," she whispered, eyes downcast. "I'll stay quiet. I'll cook. I'll sleep in your bed. Just don't turn us away." John didn't move at first, shocked by the words. The desperation. Then the child whimpered, a soft sound of hunger and pain. He stepped aside, saying nothing. The woman crawled in, holding the child tightly to her chest. John closed the door, locking out the storm. But not the silence. He grabbed a dry towel and handed it to her. She used it on the child first, then herself. Her fingers shaking too much to work fast, John poured hot soup into a bowl and placed it in front of them. The child sniffed the air, her small hands grabbing the spoon eagerly. She ate like she hadn't eaten in days, and maybe she hadn't. The woman didn't eat, just stared at the fire, her eyes wide and full of fear. John watched from his chair, unsure what to say. He had seen many things on this wild planet, but never something like this. An alien woman offering herself just to feed her child. He felt a strange pull in his chest, not pity, something deeper, heavier, after the child finished eating. She curled up on the floor and fell asleep. John placed a blanket over her, gently. The woman flinched when he got close, but said nothing. He looked at her and asked softly, "What's your name?" She paused, voice low. "Valari? Why are you here?" he asked, sitting back down. "I ran," she said. Barely a whisper. "I stole her from the breeding pens. She is mine, and they were going to take her." John felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Valari looked at him, her eyes tired, but still sharp. "I'm not asking you to care," she said. "I just need time, a few days, a little food. I can sleep outside in the shed if you want. Just don't send us back." John didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Hours passed, and the fire burned low. Valari didn't sleep, only held her daughter close. She stared at the shadows, as if expecting them to come alive. John kept watch too, not just for her sake, but for his own. He had been alone for too long, and now, in one night, his quiet world had changed. A mother and child, hunted, desperate, willing to give everything to survive. And he had let them in. Outside, the storm howled louder. Inside, 3 hearts beat quietly, wrapped in fear, warmth, and something new. Valari's voice broke the silence again. "Just once, thank you," she said, and it sounded like it hurt her to say it. John didn't reply. He just added more wood to the fire and sat down beside them, listening to the rain, and wondering what he had just brought into his life. Morning came slow on the frozen planet. The sun was weak, barely pushing light through the thick gray clouds. John stood by the window, holding a warm mug, staring at the snow outside. Behind him, the small room was quiet, but not empty anymore. Lay curled beside the fire, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. The girl's breathing was soft and steady, her little face calm for the first time. John had placed another blanket over them during the night. He didn't know why, but something about them pulled at him. He made breakfast in silence, scrambled protein cubes and hot broth, The smell slowly woke the child, her tiny nose twitching as she sat up. She rubbed her eyes and looked around, unsure of where she was. Then she saw her mother beside her, and the fear melted from her face. Valari opened her eyes. Blinking against the firelight, her expression shifted when she noticed the food. John placed a plate and a small cup near her. Stepping back without a word, the child reached for the food without waiting. Her hands messy but eager. Valari stopped her with a gentle hand, whispering something in a strange alien language. Then she looked at John, her voice careful. "I'll clean everything after, I promise." John shrugged. "No need. Let her eat." Valari's eyes softened a little. She let the girl eat freely, only helping her when she spilled the drink. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It disappeared quickly, but John saw it. He sat down across from them, sipping his tea. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. Valari didn't answer right away, then said, "Nira, she's 5 cycles." She added, brushing crumbs from the girl's chin. Nira looked up at him and gave a tiny smile, her cheeks full of food. John tried to smile back, but it came out awkward. He wasn't used to children, or aliens, or visitors of any kind. Still, something about the little girl warmed the cold edges of his heart. Valari finished eating last, slowly, carefully, as if savoring each bite. She cleaned the bowls without being asked, her hands moving with quiet purpose. Then she folded the blanket and placed it neatly on the chair. She moved like someone used to being watched, judged, controlled. "You don't have to do that," John said. Valari looked up sharply. "I said I would stay useful." John frowned. "You're not a servant." She lowered her gaze, whispering, "But I am not free either." Silence fell again, heavy. John didn't know what to say to that. He had never been owned, never been hunted. He lived in isolation, by choice, not by force. Later, he showed them the rest of the cabin. It wasn't big, just 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a small storage area. He pointed to a spare cot in the back. "You can sleep here tonight." Valari hesitated, then nodded slowly. Nira walked beside John, holding her mother's hand tightly. She looked at everything with wide eyes like it was a castle. John had forgotten how small things could feel magical to a child. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old toy cube. "Here," he said, handing it to Nira. She gasped in surprise, looking at Valari for permission. Valari gave a small nod, and the child clutched it like treasure. Her smile this time was real and bright, and John felt something strange in his chest. That evening, the wind howled again. John bolted the door and checked the fire. Valari cooked using his supplies, simple food, but with care. She served John without a word and ate beside him quietly. After dinner, Nira fell asleep beside the fire again, her toy cube glowing softly in her hands. Valari watched her for a long time, her eyes glassy. Then she looked at John, her voice low and serious. "You shouldn't have helped us," she said. "They'll come." John didn't look away. "Let them. You don't know who they are." She whispered, "They don't forget, and they don't forgive." John leaned back, arms crossed. "Neither do I." Valari stared at him, something changing in her face, flicker of trust, or maybe hope. She picked up the blanket and wrapped it around her daughter. Then she looked at John one more time before lying down beside the fire. She didn't say thank you again, but she didn't have to. This time, she closed her eyes with less fear and slept without trembling. John stayed up, watching the door. The storm was loud, but inside the cabin, there was warmth. 2 strangers had entered his life in silence, and now, without words, they had filled the empty spaces with something new. The cabin was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels too deep. The fire had died down to glowing embers, sending soft red light across the floor. John sat in his chair, staring at the flames. his eyes heavy but not ready to close. Outside, the wind still howled through the hills, screaming like ghosts in the dark. Valari lay curled beside her daughter, the blanket pulled over them both. Nira was fast asleep, her tiny fingers still holding the glowing toy cube, but Valari wasn't sleeping. She lay still, eyes open, watching the shadows dance on the walls. John noticed her eyes in the dim light. "You should rest," he said, gently. Not wanting to startle her, she didn't answer right away, then whispered, "I can't." He nodded slowly. "You're safe here." She gave a soft laugh, but there was no joy in it. "Safe is a word I stopped believing in long ago," she said. John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then maybe it's time to believe again." Valari sat up, careful not to wake Nira. Her face was tired, the kind of tired that went deeper than the body. John saw at the pain behind her eyes, the weight she carried. "Do you want to talk?" he asked quietly. She looked at the door, then back at him. "You won't understand," she said, her voice almost gone. "Try me," John replied, and after a long pause, she spoke. "I was born in Sector 9, on a farming moon," she began. "My people are seen as weak, small, meant to serve." John frowned, listening closely. "My father sold me when I was 14. To pay his ship debt," she continued. "I was marked for pleasure work, but I was lucky," she said. "My buyer didn't want a servant. He wanted a wife. He wasn't cruel, just cold." Her voice cracked slightly. "We had Nira 2 cycles later," she added, "and then he died." John watched her, silent, letting her speak in her own time. "Without him, I was no longer protected," she said. "His brothers took control, said I belonged to the family." She shook her head slowly. "They didn't care about Nira. They only cared what I could be used for." "I ran," she whispered, eyes shining in the firelight. "I took a shuttle, stole a passkey, hid for days. Nira almost died from hunger while I searched for places to land." "No one helps us," she said, her jaw tight. "We're too small, too poor, too female." John felt something burn inside his chest, a quiet kind of rage. "You shouldn't have had to beg to feed your child," he said. She looked at him, surprised by the anger in his voice. "You shouldn't have had to offer your body to survive." Valari looked down, ashamed. "I didn't know what else to give." John stood up, pacing slowly, trying to cool his thoughts. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not food, not silence, not your body. You gave me your story. And that's more than most ever do." Valari's lips parted, but no words came out. Outside, the wind dropped for a moment. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Valari placed a hand on Nira's head, brushing her hair softly. "Sometimes I wonder if she'll remember all this pain," she said. "She'll remember the warm fire." John replied, "And the food. She'll remember her mother's arms." Valari closed her eyes for a moment, her breath deep and slow. Then she looked at him again, softer this time. "Why did you help us?" she asked. John thought for a long moment, staring at the dying fire. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said. "I was a soldier once, then left behind after the war." He sat back down, eyes far away. "They said I was no longer useful, broken. So I came here, far from the noise, far from people. And now you're here," he said quietly. "And maybe that means something." Valari reached out and touched his hand. "Just for a second. Thank you," she whispered, and this time, it wasn't just a word. It carried weight, truth. And something like healing. John didn't speak. He just nodded once. The fire gave one last pop before fading to soft orange. Valari lay back down, pulling Nira close once more. This time, her body didn't shake as she closed her eyes. And this time, John stayed nearby, watching, guarding. listening to the quiet breath of two lives he had chosen to protect. Asterisk. The days passed quietly. The storm outside had stopped. But the cold stayed, biting at the windows. Inside the cabin, things had changed. Not loudly, but gently. Valari moved with less fear now, and Nira's laughter sometimes filled the air. John fixed the broken heater in the wall while Valari cooked. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of the daily rhythm. Nira followed John like a shadow. Asking questions in her soft voice, John, once silent and distant, now found himself answering, even smiling. But peace never stays long in places like this. It came first as a hum in the sky. John looked up from his tools as the air began to vibrate. The sound was too smooth, too clean, not a minor ship. Valari was outside gathering snow to boil. She dropped the bucket and froze in place. Her skin went pale. Her hands began to shake. "That sound," she whispered. "It's them." John ran out, eyes searching the cloudy sky, a sleek, black ship descended slowly near the frozen ridge. No markings, no signals, just silence and menace. He grabbed Valari's hand and pulled her back inside. He locked the door, checked the power on his old pulse rifle. Valari grabbed Nira and held her close. "She has to hide," John said quickly. Now Valari nodded, rushing toward the small crawl space under the floor. John had dug it long. "I'll go for emergencies." Now it was a place of safety, a hiding hole for a scared child. Nira didn't cry. She just looked at her mother with wide eyes. "I'll be right here," Valari whispered. "Just be brave." The knock on the door was louder than thunder. John took a breath, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and opened it. A man stood there, tall, dressed in a dark uniform with silver lines across his chest. Two soldiers in armored suits stood behind him, weapons ready. "Are you the owner of this land?" The officer asked calmly. "I am," John replied, keeping his voice steady. "We're looking for a fugitive." The man said, "A runaway female and a stolen genetic unit." John's jaw clenched, but he didn't blink. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he said. The officer stepped forward, eyes scanning the room behind John. "Mind if we look around?" he asked. "I do," John answered. "This is private property." The officer smirked. "You sure about that?" John nodded. "Very." There was a long pause, cold silence stretching between them. Then the officer stepped back, still smiling. "If you see anything unusual," he said, "report it, or you'll be seen as aiding a criminal." John didn't reply. Just closed the door and locked it again. He waited, listening to their boots crunch in the snow as they walked away. Valari came out slowly, her face pale, her body tense. "They'll come back," she said softly. "They always do." John nodded. "I know. We need to be ready." That night, they said little. Nira stayed close to her mother, clinging to her sleeve. John sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle with slow, careful hands. The old cabin felt smaller now, like the walls were holding their breath. They said she was a stolen unit. John said quietly. Valari nodded, her voice full of pain. "To them, she's not a child, she's property. But to me, she was my daughter." She added, her eyes glowing with fierce love. John looked at her, then at the sleeping girl. "She's more than any unit," he said. "She's got a soul." Valari's lips trembled, and she looked away. She learned to walk while hiding in sewage tunnels. She said she learned to read from scraps I found. "I don't care what they call her," John said. "She's staying here." Valari looked at him, stunned. "You'd fight them?" she asked. "For us." John didn't hesitate. Yes, that night, no one slept deeply. Valari lay awake, holding Nira tightly. John sat near the door, rifle beside him, eyes fixed on the window. He knew they'd come again, and next time, they wouldn't knock politely, but he wasn't afraid. He had something worth protecting now, something more important than silence. More real than peace. He had a reason to fight again. The cold wind returned the next morning, sharper than before. Snow fell in slow, quiet flakes, covering footprints and tracks. John stood outside early, his eyes on the ridge where the dark ship had landed. He knew they would return. And this time, they wouldn't just ask questions. Inside, Valari packed a small bag, her hands shaking again. "I should run," she whispered. "I can't bring this to you." John didn't turn. "You won't get far in this weather. You'll freeze before you make it to the next ridge." Velar bit her lip, her eyes full of fear. "I'd rather freeze than let them take her," she said. Nira sat quietly at the table, drawing on a piece of wood with a burnt stick. She didn't understand the danger fully, but she felt it in the air. John stepped inside, brushed snow off his coat, and shut the door. "I've made a decision," he said, voice calm but firm. "We'll hide her again, deeper this time, and if they come, I'll deal with them." Valari looked at him with disbelief. "You'll be marked," she said. "You'll be hunted for helping us." John nodded. "I've lived alone long enough. It's time I stood for something." Later that day, the sky darkened again, not with clouds, but with engines. The same black ship returned, landing harder this time, snow flying around its base. John grabbed his rifle and opened the trapdoor under the floor. "Nira, inside now," he said softly. The little girl climbed down without protest, holding her toy cube tight. Valari kissed her forehead, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Then John sealed the hatch, covering it with a heavy rug and wooden crates. He and Valari stood in the center of the cabin, waiting. The knock was faster, sharper. Like a warning, John opened the door slowly, his rifle in clear view. The officer from before stepped in without asking. This time, more soldiers followed, their faces cold under their helmets. "We've detected life signs," the officer said, small, female, matching the genetic unit's profile. John didn't blink. "Might have been a wild animal." The officer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, he said, stepping closer. "Lying to enforcement agents is a crime, especially if it involves stolen property." "She's not property," John growled. "She's a child, a living, breathing child." The officer pulled out a scanner, waving it around the room. The device beeped, once, then again, louder near the floor. "Move the crates," he ordered. John stepped in front of them, rifle raised. "I won't," he said simply. The soldiers raised their weapons in return. Tension filled the room, like fire in dry wood. Valari stood beside John, her hand resting on a hidden blade under her coat. The officer narrowed his eyes. "Are you willing to die for them?" John didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said everything. The silence screamed louder than words ever could. Suddenly, a loud crash outside distracted them all. One of the patrol bots had exploded, sparks flying through. The smoke rose in the distance, flames dancing in the cold wind. John seized the moment, firing a warning shot into the air. "Out!" he shouted. Now the officer cursed, backing away. "Retreat!" He yelled to the soldiers, back to the ship. They ran through the snow, boots crunching fast as more small explosions rang out near their landing site. John stood in the doorway, rifle ready, heart pounding. Valari breathed heavily beside him, her knife still hidden but tight in her grip. "They'll come again," she said, voice hollow. John nodded. "Let them try." He turned to the floor, pulling back the crates and lifting the hatch. Nira peeked up, her eyes wide and wet. "You were so brave," Valari whispered, pulling her daughter into her arms. John kneeled beside them, placing a hand on the girl's head. "No one's taking you," he said softly. "You're home now." Valari looked at him, eyes full of tears. "You didn't have to choose us." She whispered. "I did," he replied, and I'd do it again. That night, no one slept. But they stayed close, not because of fear, but because they had become a family outside. The fire in the distance slowly faded. Inside, something warmer had taken its place. The next morning came heavy with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the quiet before a storm. John stood at the window, watching the black ship still parked near the ridge. Smoke no longer rose, but the air was tense. Like pulled wire, Valari sat near the fire, holding Nira close. The child didn't ask questions, she just clung to her mother's arm. John had fixed the trapdoor, but knew it wouldn't help this time. They wouldn't knock again, not after what happened yesterday. "They'll attack tonight," John said. Flatly, Valari nodded, her face hard now. "I'm not running," she said. "I won't leave her, not again." John checked the last of his weapons. Old, but still working. "I don't want you to fight," he said, "but if you have to." "I will," she finished for him, pulling out the blade she always kept hidden. John handed her a small blaster, one of the last working models from his old squad. She took it with steady hands. No fear in her eyes anymore. By nightfall, the wind picked up again, but this time it wasn't snow that filled the sky, was light. Red beams scanned the land, and machines hovered low, searching with cold precision. Then came the warning sound, a deep thrum shaking the cabin's frame. "They're here," John said, his voice calm but sharp. He turned to Nira and kneeled. "Stay in the tunnel. Don't come out until I say." Nira looked scared but nodded, her toy cube clutched tightly in her small hands. Valari kissed her forehead, whispering words in her alien tongue. John opened the hatch, and Valari helped Nira climb down. He placed food, water, and a warm blanket with her. "You'll be safe," he promised, then closed the trapdoor tight. Outside, the ground began to shake. A blinding flash lit up the front of the cabin. Part of the roof exploded, fire raining down from above. John pulled Valari away, just in time. They ducked behind a thick steel wall as the second blast hit. The front door was blown open and soldiers stormed inside. John fired first, one clean shot that dropped the lead trooper. Valari rolled across the floor, aiming from the shadows. Her shot hit the second soldier in the leg, making him fall hard. The officer stepped in behind them. Unfazed, he held a new weapon, glowing with strange green light. "You can't win." "This," he said, calm as ever, "she belongs to us, and so do you now." John stood tall, blood on his cheek, eyes burning. "She belongs to no one." He growled. The officer fired. But Valari was faster. Her blast knocked the weapon from his hand. Sparks flew, and the lights in the cabin flickered. More soldiers tried to rush in, but John triggered the backup defense. A hidden charge set under the porch exploded, throwing them backward into the snow. Outside, flames spread quickly, lighting up the frozen land like dawn. Valari grabbed John's arm, her face bleeding but focused. "They're falling back," she shouted. John nodded, coughing from the smoke. But then he saw Nira's toy cube rolling across the floor. The trapdoor had cracked open in the chaos. A soldier near the back saw it too. He turned toward it, aiming his weapon before he could fire. Valari launched herself forward, her blade slashed through the air, and she knocked him down. The soldier fired as he fell. The shot grazed her side, burning deep. She cried out but kept moving, covering the hatch with her body. John fired twice, ending the threat in seconds. He rushed to her side, catching her. Before she hit the ground, blood stained her clothes, but her eyes were still fierce. "She's safe," she whispered, her voice weak. "That's all that matters." John opened the hatch. Nira peeked up with tears in her eyes. "Mama?" she cried, crawling out to her mother. Valari smiled faintly, touching her daughter's cheek. "I'm okay," she lied. "I'm right here." The fire roared around them, but the ship outside was gone. The enemy had retreated. broken and beaten, John carried Valari to the bed. Pressing a cloth to her wound, she winced, but didn't cry. "You fought like a warrior," he said. She gave a soft laugh. "For her, I'd fight the stars." Nira climbed beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother. John sat beside them, watching the fire fade into smoke. They were hurt, tired, and bleeding, but they were together, and they had won. And for the first time in a long time, the night brought not fear, but peace. The sun rose slowly over the snowy ridge. Its golden light fell on a cabin that had nearly been destroyed. Smoke still drifted from the broken roof, and ash covered the ground, but inside, something new had taken root. Peace. John stood outside, his jacket torn, his hands rough and bruised. He watched the empty sky, making sure the black ship didn't return. His eyes were tired, but his heart was steady. Behind him, the door creaked softly as Valari stepped outside. She walked slower than before, a cloth wrapped around her side where she'd been shot, but she held herself upright, her back straight, her step sure. Her hair was loose, blowing softly in the wind, and in her arms she carried Nira. Still half asleep, John turned and smiled faintly. "You should be resting," he said. Valari shook her head gently. "Not today. Today I want to stand," she said, her voice different, now stronger. They walked together to the edge of the ridge. Nira reached out her arms toward John, and he took her with a chuckle. She clung to his chest. Resting her head against him without fear, Valari watched, her eyes warm, a small smile on her lips. "I never thought I'd see her safe again," she said. John looked down at the child. "In his arms, she's not just safe," he said. "She's home." Valari looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the trees, the snow sparkled in the light. Then Valari reached into her coat and pulled out the small, broken blade. She looked at it, then tossed it down into the snow. "I don't need it anymore," she said. "I don't want to live ready to run or fight. I want to live ready to cook breakfast, to plant flowers, to tuck my daughter in." John nodded slowly. "You deserve that." Later, they repaired the cabin together. John fixed the windows, and Valari swept the broken glass. Nira helped by handing them tools. Proud of her small job, each act was quiet, but full of meaning. By evening, the fire burned warm again. John cooked, and Valari sat at the table with Nira on her lap. They laughed softly when the food burned a little, and for the first time, the sound of joy filled the home completely. After dinner, John sat by the fire while Valari tucked Nira into bed. The child didn't ask to sleep in hiding this time. She curled up on the cot with her toy cube and a soft blanket. Valari kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're safe, little one." When she returned to the fire, she didn't sit far from John. Instead, she sat beside him, her shoulder touching his. For a while, they stared at the flames, letting the silence wrap around them. Then Valari spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Do you remember what I said the first night?" she asked. John nodded. "You offered to stay in my bed, cook, be quiet just for food." She looked down, shame flickering in her eyes. "I thought that's all I had to offer," she whispered. John turned to her, his voice firm but kind. "You never had to offer anything, but now," Valari said, lifting her eyes to his. "Now I want to stay. I want to cook with you, laugh with you, and sleep beside you, but not because I owe you," she added, "because I choose to." John reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Then stay," he said simply, "as long as you want." Valari smiled, not the shy, broken smile she wore before, but a full, beautiful smile that lit her whole face. Her voice, once trembling and low, was clear now, like someone who had found her own breath again. They sat together until the fire faded. No fear, no walls, no lies, just two souls and a child resting. In the next room, and a home that had once been empty, but now was full. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the warmth stayed, not just from the fire, but from the love they had found in the ashes.